Very happy to be here. Actually, it's a very dense day for me in Prague because in the morning I was attending another workshop on a similar subject organized by Glopolis, who will be also presenting here later. And I'm also quite happy that there is no need for interpretation because I always forget to keep breaks or stop. And in the first half of the afternoon, we could hear quite a few initiatives to defend civil space in the Czech Republic and to encourage cooperation and joint communication among civil society organizations here. And basically I will be talking about something very similar, how we do in Hungary, how civil society organizations stand up for one another and defend civil space in Hungary. And the major framework for that is what we call the civilization movement or the civilization coalition. But before I get to the story of civilization itself, which is not a very long story, just a bit of a background history, how the shrinking of civil space came about in Hungary, or how we experienced it in the last 7-8 years. And of course, we have the current government since 2010, and there have already been warning signs in the first years of the current government in the form, for example, of restructuring state public funding to civil society organizations. In 2012, the government approved a new non-profit law, which included also mechanisms on the so-called National Cooperation Fund, which is basically the central tool of the government to provide funding to civil society organizations. Previously, this fund was decided about, so the use of the money was decided by elected NGO representatives, delegates. Under the new system, majority of government-appointed delegates take the decision, which of course resulted in a different pattern of giving money to civil society organizations or preferring some specific types of organizations. So changes in the funding were the first warning signs. However, this mostly left organizations to operate independently, or left organizations to work in peace, so to say. The first major clash came in 2014, and this centered on the NGO program of the EA Norway grants. The EA Norway grants are probably familiar to you because it's active in the Czech Republic as well. And what the government, it started very typically with the media smear campaign. So just 2 days after the general elections in 2014, which Fidesz have won with a 2/3 majority, an article appeared in one of the pro-government newspapers accusing my foundation and our partners, who were the operators of this program, of being politically biased towards the opposition and awarding grants on political basis. These smear campaigns then continued to evolve, and in the media we have been accused of fraud, misappropriation and all sorts of other crimes, which were followed up by harassing inspections, meaning that it was quite obvious that these inspections by the Government Control Office and later the Tax Authority have been politically motivated. And this affected the organizations that operated the programs and also 58 of the program's grantees, including all major human rights organizations, women organizations, LGBTI, and anti-corruption NGOs, as well as some environmental ones. The inspections soon turned into criminal accusations, which culminated in a police raid at our offices and the partners' offices in September 2014. And after that, lengthy court battles were launched, and basically this controversy over the EA grants was finalized or closed in late 2015, when the donor countries, so the Norwegian government and the Hungarian government, made an agreement which included that the Hungarians should stop harassing the NGO programs, operators and grantees. So that was the first major clash, but that very strongly focused on one specific funding instrument. And the political motivations were quite clear. So it was a dispute between the donor countries and the Hungarian government, but at the same time it very clearly showed that the government doesn't want to tolerate independence of NGOs, including independent funding to NGOs, so which they cannot directly control, and also by listing the organizations that they were targeting or attacking, it was also quite clear it was mostly democracy-oriented organizations. So as I said, human rights and other rights-based movements were in the main focus. I just like this picture of some of the women leaders of NGOs that were attacked at the time. So after a relatively quieter 2016, the let's say anti-civil society campaign heated up again at the beginning of 2017. First again with statements, public statements made by leading political figures accusing civil society organizations of being foreign agents, mercenaries of foreign powers, and of course the always favorite Soros network, which continues to be the main buzzword for the government when talking about unwanted civil society organizations. So these statements basically laid the ground for a new piece of legislation, which was later called the Law on Foreign Funded Organizations, which basically targeted NGOs that receive money from foreign sources, be them public or private or whatever, above a certain threshold. And these organizations were obliged by this legislation to register as foreign-funded organizations and also to use this label on their communication instruments. So while the funding allows foreign funding, by the law allows foreign funding to come in and for organizations to receive foreign funding, it aimed at stigmatizing these organizations and to label them as foreign agents or foreign mercenaries again. And during the preparatory phase of this new legislation, during the preparatory phase, a number of major nationwide organizations came together and started talking what to do about this situation. And out of this series of talking together came the Civilization Coalition, which included, or still includes, about 30-something of major leading organizations, mostly from Budapest, but not only from the capital, from all types, all sorts of areas, as I said, including human rights, community organizing, women's, anti-corruption, environment, etc. The first major action, or the first Civilization came public in March 2017, so a bit more than 2 years ago, with a, let's say, founding declaration in which we stated why civil society is important and how civil society organizations work on the benefit of Hungarian society as such, and also why we denounce and refuse this foreign-funded legislation. This was joined altogether by about 330 organizations from around the country, which form kind of, let's say, the outer circle of the Civilization network. So currently we have these 34, 35 organizations that work very closely together, and we keep contact, we keep in touch with this outer circle of organizations that we try to mobilize for specific actions or joint statements or declarations. During the process of the parliamentary debate on this foreign-funded legislation, several major spectacular actions have been organized by the coalition. The first of which was this mass demonstration in the Heroes Square in Budapest, where also the symbol, the civic heart, was born. It wasn't an intentional choice of a logo, it just was born out of this demonstration. Though I have to say that the case of civil society in itself probably wouldn't have mobilized such a big mass, but that coincided in time with the wave of demonstrations around the Central European University. You probably know how the Hungarian government chases out the Central European University from Budapest, so it was part of a bigger wave of demonstrations in spring 2017, but anyway, it brought about 10,000–12,000 people on the street in defense of civil society organizations. We also started a letter writing campaign, also collected endorsements from celebrities like writers and musicians. We had a silent protest in the parliament during the session of the Justice Committee when they discussed this piece of legislation. For me, was my favorite actually. Signs just say no to the stigmatization of NGOs. And then some further such activities. Of course, we also try to generate international solidarity, because this foreign funded legislation is not only unconstitutional, but also goes against a number of international agreements and international standards, and not only democracy-wise or standards related to democracy and fundamental rights, but also as regards the EU, also against the free movement of capital within the EU, because foreign funding also included funding from other European countries. In response, quite a number of intergovernmental and international institutions and organizations responded and tried to pressure the Hungarian government to not to approve this legislation. But in spite of all that, they did in spring, well, practically 2 years ago, yeah, I just realized. But then also we fought or tried to withstand this legislation using legal avenues. We submitted a joint motion to the Constitutional Court and also brought the case to the European Court of Human Rights in Brussels. But the European Commission also launched an infringement procedure. All these procedures are still pending or underway, so there are no results yet. In the meantime, we also try to further build the constituency of the network and to promote the image of civil society organizations. And what we found is that, I think it was also mentioned here in the Czech context, that there is a very big difference in civic organizing between the capital, Budapest, and let's say the rest of the country, so the more rural areas. And therefore, we try to create better links between local organizations in major countryside towns and those working on a national level through organizing a series of joint events, also open to the public, presenting the work of the big organizations, but also discussing together with the local organizations and the national organizations issues that are relevant locally, so campaigns or issues that local organizations work on. This is something we also continue, or try to continue in a way that working in the countryside and developing countryside networks, countryside campaigns and activism is one of the goals that we continue to work on. Again, at the beginning of last year, new plans for another piece of legislation were announced by the government, which they dubbed the Stop Soros legislation. This primarily targeted organizations that work with immigrants, refugees and asylum seekers. And basically the legislation has two main directions. One, that it criminalizes aid provided to refugees, and the other is to impose a tax, a 25% tax on the incomes of organizations supporting immigration. However, the law is very vague in terms that it doesn't define what does it mean to support immigration. So therefore it is very difficult to apply. In fact, it's not yet applied to anybody, fortunately. But it is there to threaten organizations. It could be a tool to be used against targeted organizations anytime, even if there are no consequences eventually. The process of being under examination or inspection to decide whether you are an organization supporting immigration could be very tiresome. So we protested this legislation as well. Unfortunately, it was passed last August. But as I said, fortunately, neither this nor the foreign funded legislation is effectively used at this point as a, let's say, weapon against civil society organizations. But it's very good to maintain a atmosphere of insecurity and threat. And in this context, the work that civilization is together is very important because it serves as an instrument to mutually support one another, to stand up for one another, and also as a kind of psychological self-help group. So the fact that we regularly meet, we come together, we talk together is also very important psychologically, mentally. Right now, civilization last August had a strategy session where we defined 4 areas where we want to work together, or 4 goals in our mission. One is to stop further restrictions and work to broaden civil society space, to stand up for one another, as I said, to promote the positive images of NGOs, and also to serve as a platform of exchange of know-how and experience. So these are the areas where we work on, and I think it's also very important in this respect that there are very different organizations in civilization, small and big, working on different areas, having different approaches and attitudes, and it's very important that civilization restricts itself to issues affecting civil society as such. So we don't really speak on issues that are the issues of 1 or 2 of the organizations, so we don't go into environmental things or whatever. We support one another if there is need and request coming from the NGOs, but we don't interfere, let's say, with what the specialized organizations do, but limit ourselves to this horizontal cross-cutting issue of civil space. And we also very much respect one another's strengths and weaknesses. So basically civilization works on the principle that everybody contributes as much as they can. So if they can only participate in the online discussions, fine. If they can participate with the actions or organizing things, that's even better. But everybody has an equal footing. And management-wise, it's still an informal network, so it doesn't have a legal body, and we intend to keep it that way. It has a half-time coordinator who is housed by one of the member organizations. Presently it happens to be with us, but last year it was with a different organization. And this coordinator is basically there to keep us together and to keep things moving. And on this basis we can build campaigns as and when necessary, or as and when there is capacity and joint decision to do so. So right now civilization more or less is in a, let's say, standby mode. There are no direct attacks on civil society in Hungary for the last couple of months. We have developed lots of materials that we can use in case there are renewed attacks, legal background, legal guidance, solidarity hotline, etc. And we will see what the future brings in terms of using the readiness that we have right now. So basically, we very much defined or identified the problems that you were mentioning relevant in the Czech context. I just like to underline that we came to similar conclusions as to what is necessary in order to have civil society to defend its space or to broaden its space on the long run. Thank you very much.